see, Murph, for the past 1,000 years, I have been constructing this elaborate ritual to summon forth 2 podcasters for this episode.
Okay, I mean, we just know people. You don't have to do a ritual. We can just, like, contact someone.
No. Henceforth, I summon thee, Thomas Wilde and Will Borger. I put in cool editing and shit, yeah. Like.
Okay. You love...
I'm sorry, the eldritch beast you are trying to contact is unavailable. At the sound of the hellish screaming, please leave a message, and they will get back to you within this geologic era.
I've come to talk to you about your car's extended warranty. Sorry.
Okay, right.
I'm just here. Mine worked, so what's up?
Okay. For thousands of years, he lay dormant.
For thousands of years, I lay dormant, waiting for this very podcast, doing nothing else.
Yup.
You don't
You've
do
been working
anything
a lot,
else.
Will.
But his free cell score has to be seen to be believed.
Yes, but listen, it's I definitely haven't been sleeping. I have been eternal darknessing. Okay. There
you go. That's what it's all about. But also, we've been doing an October Fighting League, right?
We have. So, if people were here, I would yell at them to play their games. I have been running a monthly league for, I think we're running 5 games this league. We're never going to do that again. No, we're 6 games this month. We're never doing that again. We're capping at 4. But I've been running an October Fighting League. We are doing Guilty Gear Strive, Street Fighter 6, Tekken 8, Grand Blue Fantasy vs. Rising, Street Fighter 3, Third Strike, and Dragon Ball FighterZ. And it's been fun. We have, I think, 19 people signed up this month, and a bunch of games played, and people can come and play on their schedule. And when they're doing it, it's pretty awesome. So, that was what Go ahead.
I was going to ask you, Will, do you personally like the league more than... If you check on Will's YouTube channel, he also hosts Golden Weeklies in terms of, like, one, hopefully weekly, a tournament of a double elim bracket. Do you like that format more, or do you like the league?
I think I like the bracket more, and we haven't done a bracket in a while, actually, since before EVO, I don't think, just because people have been busy. But it's less work, for sure, to do a bracket. I think the benefit of the league is we can have longer sets, and we get to have people who wouldn't be able to play during bracket day come play. And everybody plays everybody. And we've gotten a lot of people who have never been to Golden Weeklies before because they can't make the time that we normally run. So, I mean, they have their positives and negatives, but let me tell you, man, I have uploaded I'm just looking at the videos here. We've got 4, 30, 45.
Oh no.
Over 100 videos for just this month.
Oh my gosh.
And we are not even close to being caught up. So,
on behalf of me specifically, thank you for organizing and hosting, because that does take a lot of extra work that no one is paying you to do.
No,
you are doing for the love of the game.
For the love of the game. I honestly should start charging dues, like $5 every league, just for everybody. Like, gives me a chance to go buy a bottle of Jack Daniels or something to help me as I'm uploading these videos.
Yeah, basically. Murph, how have you felt about the league?
I have been enjoying the league as a bit of a shake-up to the usual Golden Weeklies bracket we've been doing, mostly because I think I've been having it allows me to have matches with people I don't normally get matched with during the seeding of some of the tournament brackets. And I kind of like the I don't know, punching out my dance card, as it were, being oh, I need to fight this person and this person in Tekken and Street Fighter. Let's coordinate a time for that. Definitely, I don't think for next month I'm going to be signed up for 3 games. Right now, I'm trying to decide between sticking with Tekken or Street Fighter. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna keep with Guilty Gear. I didn't do as good in Guilty Gear compared to those 2 games, but I've been having a lot of fun with Guilty Gear, so I'm gonna stick with it. And I think a lot of my sets, I do feel I got close. I just didn't finish it.
You should 100% stick with Guilty Gear. That is my opinion. And I think you're really good at Tekken. So I think those, in my opinion, would be the two that you should really like fall in love with here.
The one thing against Tekken that I noticed this morning is that Tekken is 110 gigabyte install, and I could really use the extra space on my computer.
Video games have gotten too big, man. It's crazy.
There was actually, I do want to call something out. Will, something you commented on that's been sticking with me for the long October weeks is you said, I think Murph's character type isn't white woman normals, it's girls with heavy sweeps. And I haven't stopped thinking about that.
I mean, I think it's true, though. Like, you have a very specific, like, Murph gravitates towards girls with a very specific kind of sweep. And,
I used to manage a Japanese punk band called White Woman Normals.
I mean, listen, the Japanese know what's up. All I'm saying is, like, if you watch the videos, if you'd like to keep up with what we're doing, like, if you've never seen Golden Weeklies or anything, you can find all of our stuff at Edgar Allan Bro 7 on YouTube. A lot of that stuff doesn't have, like, descriptions or anything. It's just, like, the actual old brackets do, but the new videos don't because there's 100 of them. But yeah, you know, we've got a bracket. If anybody who listens to this is industry or press or whatever, or, you know, if Murph or Bro is willing to vouch for you and you'd really like to come play, you know, hit me up. We are always looking for more people.
I made this joke on Twitter, but I'm going to say it here because I still think it's funny, is I think your ulterior motive is to gather enough games press people to rally them against menus and fighting games.
Listen, I'm doing the community a service, okay?
Every session we've had for the October week where we get like 7 people in a Discord call to go through the fights we need to do, everyone is complaining about every game's invite system, how hard it is to set up a room. It's really funny.
It's a universal fighting game problem, in all honesty.
It's true. It really is true.
I think Thomas is coming back to life. Thomas, did you play Fear the Spotlight?
Why, yes, I did. I played that for my weekly column on Hard Drive's Minus World header, where I play a new indie game every week and talk about it. And it's the first game from... Is it Blumhouse or Bloomhouse? How do you pronounce that guy's name?
I'm not honest. I think it's Bloomhouse, but when you said it the
I thought
other
it
way,
was Blumhouse. So listen, it's Schrodinger's name. Nobody is really sure.
Both.
Well,
it's both and neither.
Well,
people know how to say Schrodinger's name.
Well, that fucking guy has a game imprint now. And what they did is they grabbed a really small-time horror indie from last year and they re-released it with more budget and more detail. I am currently trying to chase down reports about what exactly was in the original version of the game versus what's in this game, because it strikes me that there are a lot of things that are different. It's very much wearing its Silent Hill influences on its sleeve. You walk into the school library at the start of the game, and the Book of Lost Memories from Silent Hill 2 is in the Halloween display case below a quest item, so they want you to notice it. The idea is that you play as Vivian, who has followed her best friend into the school library in the middle of the night running up to Halloween because her best friend wants to do a seance. And as it turns out, the school is extremely haunted because there was a fire there about 20 years before the events of the game where a bunch of kids died during the school play. And
I played the Steam Next Fest demo for this, and I couldn't figure out is this set in like modern times or is it the 90s?
It is distinct. I have seen reports that it's distinctly the early 2010s because the second scenario you have a smartphone.
Okay.
I just saw somebody say that apparently there's something I missed, that it's very much supposed to be 2011, and you can find a file at the end of the game which is a archived bit of information from 2010. So I wasn't sure how much further after 2010 it was, but it's after that point.
Okay. Because it has this retro PS1 aesthetic to it. The main girl's kind of looks like Daria.
Yeah. the way that her glasses pretty much shield her entire face. Which is kind of a neat trick to bypass not having the budget for good facial animations, although that's very much something that the re-release fixes. But it's still very much a punched up, late PlayStation / early Dreamcast sort of look for a game. Mm-hmm. But the idea is that you are pulled back in time to a kind of twisted version of the high school as it was right before the fire in 1991. And Vivian is looking for her friend Amy while also having to dodge this unexplained phenomena where a guy in a burned shirt with a theatrical spotlight for a head is trying to find her. And if he's able to shine the light directly on her, she takes some damage. And so the entire game is a relatively low-stakes stealth adventure. But the thing what I said in my column, which of course all right-thinking people who will ever listen to this will go and read and internalize and make a part of their weekly routine, is that it feels a great deal like Vivian's part of the game is what they made originally when they were indies. This was made by a husband and wife studio called the Cozy Game Pals, who are both have a pretty strong background in the animation industry, without having their CVs in front of me. I remember one of them is a former animator at Nickelodeon. But Vivian's game feels like it might have been the first thing they made, and they might have polished it up a little bit when they got the Blumhouse deal. But then, when you clear Vivian's game, you get to play as Amy. And I thought for a second I was going to be cynical about it, because Amy spends the entirety of Vivian's game locked in a cage somewhere. And I thought it would be really funny if the entirety of the scenario was just Amy staring at the floor for about an hour and a half. But as it turns out, she's having this kind of journey to the center of the mind while Vivian's looking for her. So Amy has this very different adventure in a completely different locale, which is based in a weird nightmare representation of a house she used to live in when she was a kid. So Vivian's game is very much a standard high school horror sort of affair, whereas Amy's game is very much about Amy and the trauma she's experienced as a kid with nothing. When I say trauma, it makes it sound worse than it is, but it's very much very standard bad things that can happen to a kid. You know, her parents split up, she's got a weird relationship with her mom now, that sort of thing. And you find out about that over the course of about an hour and a half of being chased around this nightmare version of her old house by a character from a movie she was scared of when she was a kid. So it's two very different games at the end, and Amy's is much more focused on Amy as a character, and I think it's much improved as a result. Vivian's has a problem with being sort of baby's first survival horror, up to and including the fact that there is a mystery to be solved, but almost every part of it is fed to you by an abandoned diary page that's been placed someplace where you can't miss it.
We may talk about another game like that.
Yeah, the Uncharted Notebook, or I always want to sing the Random Diary as an audio log song from Zero Punctuation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's an interesting story, and you can put it together fairly easily on your own. It's got a few interesting details. But it feels very much like somebody looked at Silent Hill and said, can we do this without gore?
Yeah, would you say this is like a PG-13 or even a PG type scenario here in terms of content?
Yeah, definitely in terms of what content warning I would put on it. There's no real blood, there's not a lot of violence, and when there is violence, it's nothing that would be out of place on, I don't know, primetime TV 20 years ago. I think for people who've been playing these games most of their lives, it's going to be a little bit mild and a little bit easy for them. But I would give it to a kid or to a newcomer to the genre, or if you usually aren't into horror but you want to play something for Halloween to be part of this, the deal. And also, it is a game that has a central queer relationship, so if that's something you're into, it's a must-play. Because one of the first things you can find out is that part of why Vivian has come along to break into the school in the middle of the night with Amy is because she is planning to wait until after they do the seance and then give Amy this love letter that she's carrying around in her. It's in Vivian's inventory from the moment you start the game right up to the end. Yeah. So part of the reason that she is so desperate to find Amy is because, oh my god, I was going to ask her out after this.
How long would you say the run times are? Because whenever I remember playing this, maybe I played the demo way back when or something, but I remember it being very, very short, and I only played one playthrough.
My Steam account says that I've spent 5.5 hours on a full playthrough. Only died a couple of times, didn't get too stuck at any of the puzzles. I would say that Amy's might be a little bit shorter than Vivian's, but I'd say they're still pretty close to the same. So call it about 2 hours and change for each scenario, 2 scenarios. Might get another play through it if you wanted to go back and get all the achievements, because there are a bunch that are kind of weird.
Does this instill confidence in Blumhouse as, like, a publisher now? Because I remember, what was it, Summer Games Fest this year? They had, like, a whole segment showcasing all these diverse titles they're going to do. Is this, like, a good first impression?
I don't think it's a bad one. It's not a bad game. Unless you're one of those people who sees PG-13 on a horror movie and immediately nopes back out. Which, admittedly, I have been there before. But it's...
I think there's a difference between PG-13 that was R and it was cut to be PG-13 in a marketing sense, and then an actual story for adolescents, etc., etc.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? There's a difference.
I described this to somebody last week as R.L. Stein's Silent Hill, and I think that's pretty much what I'm going with for it. It's very much dealing with the whole abstract environments of a Silent Hill game, or puzzles that don't really need to be there. It's got some of the same fascination with mannequins. But there is nothing in there that I would not give to a sufficiently precocious 13-year-old.
There we go.
And I think on top of that, it is a decent but fairly mild. There was at least one moment in there which did get me. So if you are not a diehard horror sicko, I think it would be a pretty good, like I said, entry level, or if you don't always play this sort of thing, then this is your jam. I think there has to be a place in the genre for stuff which is only a little scary. And that's pretty much the niche that Fear the Spotlight falls into.
Speaking of a little scary and some sickos, what the fuck is this Straftat game, Murph?
This is a game I only started playing like 2 days ago, because it released. This is a very small, free-to-play, Quake-inspired arena shooter. It is strictly 1v1s on small maps with weapon pickups. There are about, I think, 70 different maps and 30 different weapons. And if you buy the $5 DLC, that all doubles.
Oh my goodness. So it is pay to win.
Well, you can't access those maps unless you have the DLC.
Oh, fair. Okay.
And, yeah. This is just... It's small, it's mechanically sound, and the matches are quick. They're all, you do 2 rounds, best of 2 each map with whoever you're randomly matched with, and then first to 6 wins. And you move on to your next set. It's just something that I've installed on my work computer, and when I have just a lull, I'll boot that up, play for 10-15 minutes, get a few sets in, log off, have a great time with it. You can do all sorts of Quake era stuff. You can rocket jump, you can slide, you can wall run. It's just fun and tight, and I want to promote it because I want the community for it to grow, because I'm worried it could dry up quickly.
That's totally fair.
You had me at it's like Quake.
Yeah.
This looks like they got Igmar Bergman to do all of their map design.
This is kind of sick, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, the maps are small, but they're layered, so it'll be a lot of different levels. And I will say the levels are very diverse and will oftentimes have some unique gimmicks to them. It kind of reminds me of Duck Game, but as an actual, first-person shooter. Where it's this level is a race to see who can get, the gun first. Like, you're on this long, narrow path, and you can just see, like, the shotgun at the end of the hall. Or this level it's an arena made entirely out of ice. Or this level is in pitch black, and you have to find a flashlight, and then find a gun to put in your other hand so you can kill the guy. You know, it's, like I said, it's just little quick bursts of arena shooter activity.
Okay, dang, this looks awesome. So wait, like, I want to imagine this when I play. Do I choose the map? Do I choose like a server? Or is it just like a matchmaking, you matched up and then it's a random stage?
So you can host a game and decide your own map playlist and also set it to like friends only, public invites, private, etc. The game doesn't really have like a training ground per se. Like, you can boot up a shooting range, but there's only like 3 guns in there, with a game that can have up to like 60.
Dang.
But if you're doing just like a public game, or you do a quick match to join someone else's, it loads up pretty quick. You ready up and then you go to play the game. It does have like public chat and proximity chat.
What does that mean when it's 1v1?
It means if you want to talk trash against a singular other stranger on the internet,
you got to be close to him.
Yeah,
that's great. I do like that.
Can you imagine? You're just
or you shout at their dead body.
There you go.
I've definitely. No one's talked to me. I think some people aren't aware that the game just has your mic on by default. So I've heard some dudes muttering to themselves.
That's great.
Can you imagine, like,
that?
You're trying to be sneaky on the map, right? You're looking for the other dude. You just hear it get, like, louder and louder. Like, this motherfucker right here with his goddamn mic.
He ain't gonna be ready when I come around the corner.
Yeah. Like, I think this would be fun to just, like, boot up with some friends and play a few rounds. Like, it's genuinely... I've only been playing it for the last 2 days, but it's some of the most fun I've had this year.
Oh my god, it means that anybody who's trying to Twitch this game is at an automatic disadvantage.
That's true.
That makes
Yo, check it out. I'm right behind him and he has no idea what the fuck.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Chat, should we turn off proximity chat?
Chad, I feel like you're holding me back here.
Dang, okay. So, you sold me, Murph. But Thomas, you played Bridge Curse 2. What is this?
Well, ever since I started telling people that I have a regular indie column, weird things keep showing up in my email. This isn't that weird, but it is the sequel to a Taiwanese horror movie that became a game. And this very much is in the first-person horror game vein, where there's a lot of it that still kind of thinks it's a movie. But it's set in modern-day Taiwan, and deals with a haunted university. There were a bunch of students who were filming a horror movie in the university halls, and one of them accidentally captured footage which looks a hell of a lot like a ghost caught on camera. Had nothing to do with the movie they were filming, but that's what's got the university a fresh wave of infamy. And so you play as a cast of 4 people who are attempting to figure out what happened, which all seems to revolve around the sudden disappearance of a woman on the campus about 20 years before the game started. I'm not very far into it, but it's very much the sort of game where it feels like it was only localized under protest. It's still very much up to its eyeballs in Taiwan folklore and mythology. It also has a really unfortunate habit of not letting you skip anything, but it's a stealth-based dodge the ghost, gore 'em up, which feels like the direct opposite on the Fear the Spotlight pendulum. I'm not that far into it, but it's probably something I'm thinking about covering for next week. But it is a creepy Taiwanese ghost dodging game.
I clicked on this developer to see what else they've done, and was blindsided the fact they made the game of Voice Love on Air, which I have heard of. That's a visual novel dating sim where you date voice actors.
Actually, I think I might have found a poster for it in the college at the start of the game.
There you go. Let me ask. So how?
Yeah, I did. That is exactly the poster I found. I was wondering what it was doing there.
Let me ask you, how much the way you framed it, and with the stealth elements, how much of this is more like an adventure game or the adventure elements of a survival horror, and how much of it is a monster in the room that you're hiding from? Like, where's the gameplay ratio here?
Well, when it actually started to be a game and not just walking around looking at things, there were a number of weird puzzles. There was a whole thing about finding inserts to put onto an abstract painting to decode a safe combination from it. Now I've got a lantern which can occasionally radiate a special light which lets me spot ghost phenomena. And one of the things which amuses me more than it should is that my character has just found a ghostly haunted lantern, which lets you decode phenomena and spot the other world. And most crucially, when you are running from a ghost, you can just backhand the ghost across the face with the lantern and stun them for a second. It eventually recharges, but the fact that I can just turn around and completely pimp smack the taste out of a ghost's mouth is part of what's making me stick with this, because I ordinarily have a really hard time with stealth-based dodge-em-up survival horror, especially when it's something that I feel like I could probably handle if it was me in there. Which
it breaks immersion, because it's like I felt that way about Outlast.
Well,
not so much when the monsters come, but like it's like when it's hide and seek.
Yeah.
I feel like I like a more of a back and forth in combat. It's okay if I have a gun and 2 bullets, and the 2 bullets won't do anything, but it's the illusion of like, oh, I can fight this, and then when I can't, that's when it gets scary. That's how I usually feel about it.
Yeah, that was my chief problem with Outlast 2 in specific, which I feel like I talked about the last time I was on here. When Outlast 2 is you being chased by just a bunch of dumb fucks in robes, as opposed to some kind of supernatural horror or immortal serial killer or giant murder golem or what have you, something that you cannot realistically expect to fight. But if it's just farmer shovelfuck and his 2 inbred sons, then I should be able to pick up this chair and go to work.
Mm-hmm. And the way you framed this game, I don't want to say it was lightly localized, but how is the presentation, and is that localization a problem?
It's not really a problem. I don't mean to make it sound like it's a bad localization. It has more to do with the fact that it hasn't really made an effort to soften the edges of the culture for someone from outside of it. It's sort of like how all of the Yakuza games double as a low-impact travelogue.
Yes.
Where
I can speak to that.
Or for that matter, Ghostwire does the same thing. Where all of the healing items in the game are a wide variety of Japanese snack foods, which are described in your inventory menu, like the tourism bureau for Japan had a hand in writing about them. Would you like to know what natto is? Play Ghostwire. But the thing about Bridge Curse 2 is that you're in a university full of odd details that you might not necessarily recognize as an American, and so most of them are highlighted to you and have a little bit of excruciating detail along the way. None of this is to take away from the fact that once it gets off the road, or rather on the road, it's actually pretty scary and pretty effective. I'm looking forward to getting further into it, but if you're looking for something in that vein, it's so far it's shaping up to be pretty good. I have a little bit of a problem with Outlast 2 in specific, which I feel like I talked about the last time I was on here. When I'm looking forward to getting further into it, but if you're looking for something in the vein of a creepy East Asian horror movie along the lines of, because Taiwan has a pretty solid horror scene, but if you're looking for something in that vein, it's shaping up to be pretty good. I have a little bit of a problem where I'm bottlenecked on the encounter I'm in right now, but I don't know if I would chalk that up to it being a poorly designed encounter yet, so much as me not quite knowing what the rules are. So, yeah, there's always that point where, is this bad or do I suck at it? And I have not made up my mind on that just yet. I'm inclined towards... That's
always a tough line.
Yeah, I'm inclined towards thinking it's the latter for the moment. But for right now, Bridge Curse 2, Taiwan horror movie /game, Haunted University, lots of blood.
Okay, all right. Murph, speaking of lots of blood, you played Signalis.
Yeah, speaking of horror games that the host hasn't finished in time for the episode. So I'm finally playing Signalis after Brogan gifted it to me like a year ago.
I don't even remember this. Good job, old Brogan.
Yeah.
Past Brogan setting up future Murph for success.
Yeah,
There you go.
it's like Eternal Darkness. I'm greatly enjoying Signalis quite a bit. What I didn't know going into this as far as like gameplay is how much there is like Myst influence in this game's puzzles and just UI interaction.
This sells me more than people being like, it's like Silent Hill. Like, nah, bro, tell me it's about Myst. Like, yes.
Where a lot of rooms and things you interact with go into a first-person perspective, and you're like turning dials, you're flicking switches, and trying to figure out how like the machinery works.
One for the sickos.
Yeah, like the horror combat, I'm kind of give or take on. I like the creature designs that they're like these androids, but it's kind of like Terminator, where they have a flesh layer, and that flesh layer has like become infected, so they're like robot zombies. And how they like shamble around. I like the music that plays when one of them spots you, just like this discordant like clanging of pots and pans. But also I feel a lot of the combat encounters, number one, it's pretty easy to run by things. So when you run by something and go into a new room, like you just have like these 5 seconds of very loud, oppressive music playing for not a lot of payoff, if that makes sense. Right now what's fascinating me most is like the story, and how I genuinely don't know what's going on or what's going to happen in a good way. Like I'm in the mines, which I feel is probably like a midpoint or something. And I'm just waiting for like a shoe to drop to explain what's going on, because you're this android, but also looking for their human operator. But there's these themes of like maybe like a time loop's at play, or you're reliving memories of your human self, and that's what's going on. Maybe there's like some weird alien stuff going on this mining colony. And you're picking up items from your flashbacks. That's a little strange. And every now and again it will just like flash a block of German text on screen that I can't read, but I'm assuming are like little Easter eggs and clues. And also the King in Yellow keeps popping up, and I'm now feeling I need to go back and reread the King in Yellow to get more clues as to what's going on. I think it's also quoting a Lovecraft story at times, but I'm not sure which one. There's a line of dialogue that I recall from somewhere.
But in general, like, what do you think of the art style, for instance?
I like the art style. I like these very... What would be the word here? It's not exactly, like, flat colors and designs, and it's not something really like PS1. It kind of feels like some sort of, I don't know, horror vaporwave, in a way.
Sure,
Does
I
that
can see
check
that.
out? It's like this 90s anime aesthetic, especially when it goes into the cutscenes. It transfers between 2D animated cutscenes and then 3D animated models for certain sequences.
The
that's...
line you're thinking of is from H.P. Lovecraft's The Festival. Things have learned to walk that ought to crawl.
That's it. Okay. Yeah. And... what was I talking about? Oh, the aesthetic. Also, it's not... I wouldn't really say this is, like, Silent Hill or Resident Evil, actually, in its UI and aesthetic. What I'm getting more is, like, Metal Gear Solid.
I can see that. Yeah, 100% there's some of that, yes.
Especially in the, like, menu management. I do feel this could be a me problem. Some of the button mapping is a little odd to me, because, like, confirm is on B, or circle button if you're on the PS2 or like a PlayStation controller. And that's just taken a while for me to get used to. And I'm constantly, like, opening my map when I mean to open my inventory. I don't know what it is. It just doesn't feel... Intuitive's not the right word. I guess standard to the genre, maybe? I don't know, for where those buttons should be.
Well, one of the things that I would like to point out to you, which is not a spoiler, I've been trying to keep my mouth shut because you're not done with the game yet, but I did interview the makers of Signalis a couple of years ago. And one of the things they deliberately tried to do with the game is they are trying to do something which is very similar to what the first couple of Silent Hill games did, where they're trying to use the systems and mechanics of the game as a deliberate way to make you feel oppressed by them. It's awkward on purpose because existing in the society that they've built would be awkward under the best of circumstances, and these are not those.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was gonna say, I played this game, I don't know, 2 years ago now. I don't know how long it's been. But that being said, one of the big things that stuck out to me in terms of execution was inventory management. To me, this was the most impressive survival horror game regarding inventory management and controlling what space or what to bring for when you're routing and for bosses. Not to say anything, but there's bosses in the game where you have to really make decisions about what you're bringing into the fight.
So, let me ask this, because I'm playing the most up-to-date patched version, so I don't know if you two...
About a year after it came out, they released a update which allowed you to put on a slightly more updated version of it, which expanded your inventory capacity, and also made the two of the most crucial plugins not occupy an inventory slot.
Yes, and that's what I'm playing on, because the game defaulted and recommended that. It does the thing
I
where...
liked the pain.
Yeah, where it pops up, like when you start the game, it's like, what sort of gameplay experience would you like tailored to you? To be honest, whenever a game does that to me, I just stick with defaults, because I don't know what the gameplay experience is going to be. So it's like, if it's like you have a harder time managing inventory, I'm like, well, let's see how managing inventory normally is. I could imagine if you have to like make space for your flashlight or your camera, that would cause me to make some harder choices. I'm not feeling a whole lot of inventory pressure at the moment, but even when I played like original Resident Evil, I wouldn't walk around like with ammo. I would stockpile that and just use whatever's in my pistol clip, so I could pick up as much as possible and shuttle it back to a safe room.
Yeah. But in general, how are you feeling? What's your disposition on it? Like, you're going into it with, like, you're thinking B or what?
It's sitting at, like, I guess, a B tier if we want to put, like, a letter to it. I think right now I really want to see where it goes and if it sticks the landing for all the, I guess, confusion it's throwing at me.
Me personally, I think it does stick the landing. So please see it through, I would say.
I would also make the point here that this has tripped up a lot of people that I've talked to. It does have a fake ending.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So if you find yourself thinking, wow, that seems abrupt, it was. Keep going.
Fair enough. I'll keep that in mind.
Also, the subreddit for Signalis is currently a festival of gay robot memes, so don't take that into account at all.
That was the only... I reminded myself to play it this year because an artist I follow was just... also started playing Signalis and was just posting a lot of gay robot art.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, hey. Going to Reddit was the real mistake.
You guys had me interested before, and when you said gay robot art. Now I'm all in, baby.
Guys, let's go into the monster minute or variety minute, or honestly, still what you playing. Let's talk about Silent Hill 2 real quick.
All right, I'll just sit off to the side. You guys handle this. I've never played Silent Hill 2. I've only watched.
For fuck's sake.
I think to start, we should start with Will's take on the original Silent Hill 2.
For fuck's sake,
so
part 2, the quick game.
Yeah.
So listen, my wife and I played Silent Hill 2 for the first time this year. Had never played it. Didn't really know what the plot was. Hadn't been spoiled on it, thankfully, going into it. Just kind of knew, like, dude goes to town, gets a letter from wife who is supposed to be dead, but may or may not be dead. Question mark. Y'all gaslit me for 23 years about the quality of this video game. 23 years. It plays terribly. Is one of the worst playing video games I've ever played in my life. Which people will be like, oh, that's part of the psychological horrors. The game's keeping you alive. No, bullshit. It plays badly. It plays so badly. And I think what really got me was people are like, the writing. And it's like, there are parts of the writing that's good. I'm a published fiction writer. I come at this at a different perspective than a lot of people do. I have a master's degree. Like, I studied this. Like, my standard for good writing is higher than most people's.
That sound you hear is Will Borger slapping his dick on the table.
Whoa!
I love the narration. I loved how breathy it was. So the thing for me was that there are parts of Silent Hill 2 that are extremely well written. I guess I'm going to spoil Silent Hill 2 now, so if you are playing the remake...
We can spoil it. Yeah, let spoilers about
the game is 23 years old. I'm allowed to spoil
the dog.
it. It can drink. So, like, there are parts where, near the end of the game, where Angela's walking up the stairs and, James sees the fire and she's like, it's like this for me all the time. That part's good. The letter that is read at the end of the game is quite good. The actual scene where it reveals that my wife and I kind of figured this out way in advance. They're like, yeah, James actually smothered his wife with a pillow. And this is like his personal hell. Also good. Like, there are well-written scenes in this, but the way people talk about Silent Hill 2, like, you would think that it is... This is going to sound harsher than I mean it to. A bad Resident Evil game that took a freshman psych course. Because that is what it is, functionally. Right? Like, and there's a lot to admire about it, right? Like, it has themes. It plays with non-Euclidean space. That's really cool. It has emotional and, like, thematic stuff that plays out through the gameplay where it's like, I shouldn't be able to go this far down. And I think it's the Historical Society where you keep having to jump down the hole, and at one point you jump into your own grave. And, like, the dead body that may or may not be James covered, by the sheet. Like, there's a lot of really cool, like, stuff like that. And I admire that the entire game is built around James, the character. But, again, the way this game is talked about, like, it is the peak of horror. Nothing has come close. Everything is chasing Silent Hill 2. And it's like, really? And I think the conclusion that I have come to here is that gamers don't read books or watch actual film. And so if you don't read books or watch actual film, I imagine that this is incredibly impressive, especially for, again, and I'm playing it way after the fact, right? But I cannot reconcile the video game that I sat through for 5 hours that plays terribly with the breathless, overwhelming praise.
This is pretty much word for word the argument I have about the original Final Fantasy VII. Because I came into that game very late after a number of people who I knew, trusted, and generally agreed with about pop culture had played that game for so long that it had actively endangered their lives. I knew a guy who failed out of college that semester because of Final Fantasy VII on the PlayStation. And by the time I got around to it, it had been a few months, and I thought it was just kind of mid. I'd been set up to think of it as some kind of elaborate... I can't think of the word I want, but it was supposed to be a much bigger deal than it was. And I just thought it was kind of a moderately more visually impressive Final Fantasy game. Like you'd taken Final Fantasy VI and given it Video Toaster. That sounds a lot to me like the argument you're making. And one of the things that you have to understand is that for a lot of people who are talking about the original Silent Hill 2 like that, they are coming at it from the perspective that it was one of the things that they played when they were much younger, at a much earlier point in the overall medium. And you are coming at it after 23 years of it having had a fairly profound impact on not necessarily mainstream horror, but definitely a lot of indie horror games in the last, 10 years, 12 years have owed a certain amount of debt to it.
Yeah, Signalis, right? I haven't played it, but people talk about it was
I would say many. I would say many horror indies that Thomas plays that is featured on Hard Drive. A lot of them he'll say inspired by Silent Hill 2, because it is.
That was my. If I had to summarize Hollow Body in one sentence, it is a Silent Hill game, but with the idea behind Silent Hill 2 in particular is that I don't think anybody, even the most fervent fans, would tell you that it is a 100% round-the-clock, well-written game. It has more to do with a lot of the intangibles that you encounter as you're working your way through it. The phrase that people keep using in conjunction with the remake is the word oppressive. And this is something that I would argue is 100% at the feet of Akira Yamaoka. Silent Hill is something we talk about to this day because of him. His sound design and his soundtrack are 90% of why Silent Hill is on the map at all. If you had Akira Yamaoka make a Resident Evil game, then nobody would finish it. They would just shit themselves to death about halfway through.
Can I get a temperature check from Will real quick? What is your experience with Silent Hill outside of 2?
So I will not lie to you, it's not a lot. I played some of 1. I would like to go back and finish it. I found 1 actually really compelling in a way that I don't think 2 ever worked for me. And I didn't stop it because I was bored. I stopped it because, my wife and other things happened and we wanted to play it together.
Sure. No, yeah.
And so I found 1, I wasn't super far. I was maybe 2 hours into it. So, this is very early impressions. But I found the use of the camera more interesting. I found the sound design, which Thomas talks about, which is also one of the things that I really like in Silent Hill 2. And, people who are listening to this who might be Silent Hill 2 fans are going to be like, this guy's an asshole, whatever. And you are perfectly right to feel that way, but I want to stress that I'm not, dunking on Silent Hill 2 for the sake of dunking on Silent Hill 2. I don't believe in doing that. What I am trying to do is... I guess I don't want to come across as angry or, what I really am is confused. Because, again, and I know I'm coming to it mad late, big influence, all that stuff, but I'm just kind of I don't understand how we got here. So, again, not a lot of experience with the rest of it. I watched the film adaptation, which I don't think is actually terrible for video game adaptation.
There are a couple of things that you could say about the film adaptation that I can wait, but its flaws are really interesting to me.
I think I think the film is interesting in that now having played Silent Hill 2 and played some of 1, because I saw it way before I played the games, I feel like it understands the assignment in a way that a lot of video games films don't, and even its failures are interesting to me. But yeah, so that's more or less my experience with Silent Hill, and then all the things, of course, in the time since that have been inspired by Silent Hill, of which there are dozens and dozens and dozens, right? But I guess for me, again, the most confusing thing about it was the way people talked about it, because I can understand, later on the podcast we're going to talk about Eternal Darkness, and we talked about Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly last year, and when those games get talked about this way, I understand. As someone who came to Eternal Darkness much later and came to Fatal Frame as a kid, but then we went back and revisited, and I was like, oh no, this is just as scary and effective as it was when I was a kid. Having very little memory of it. And Silent Hill 2, I feel like I would have been impressed if I was 10 or 11, which is how old I was when the game came out. And I do think the thematic, thing of, again, jumping down your own grave and doing all that stuff, and the way the monsters are designed to reflect James's psychological states and his own hang-ups, and Maria as a character, reflecting man, I wish my wife was sexier. All of that stuff is interesting, but I don't think it is not the most damning thing for me about Silent Hill 2 is that it gets to the end and it starts doing really interesting things with the hotel and the historical society and non-Euclidean space and all this stuff, and then when it finally gets to start playing with things as a video game, it ends. And that's really a bummer. Yeah, so that's my experience with Silent Hill, and again, like, I don't want to come off as like Silent Hill 2 sucks and has no redeeming value, because I don't think that's true, but yeah, I mostly came out of it being like, this is y'all's king? Like, this is the thing
it's
that you
more
guys...
the confusion with the reputation.
Yeah, it's just, it doesn't track for me. In the same way that I think, Thomas talked about FF7, like, is a good point. And I think also FF7, I understand why people love that game. I love FF7. I didn't play it at release, but it's also, like, deeply flawed. And we love FF7 because of its cast. Like, realistically, we like it because of those characters. We are willing to overlook a lot of things for those characters. That combat system is not particularly good. Materia is not a particularly excellent system for leveling characters up. Like, it has a lot of problems, right? The translation is terrible. No offense to the translator, he did that in 2 weeks. Yeah, like, basically... He had no time to do it. It was just him. Like, I wouldn't be able to do that. But, like, it has problems, right? But and we talk about those things when we talk about FF7. And earlier FF fans will talk about, 7 in a lot of ways is not the really impressive game that you guys think it is. And we can have that conversation, right? Whereas here, we don't talk about Silent Hill 2 that way. We put it on a pedestal and we hold it up as this, like, nothing has ever done this ever again, and nothing will ever do this, and it's the most important. And it's just, it is harmful to the medium and harmful to our ability to be critics to hold games up like this, especially when, if you go back to it and you take the nostalgia glasses off, it is a deeply flawed thing.
Well, I think one of the things which is interesting about that is how survival horror evolved in the next couple of years afterward. Because if you go back and you look at the history of the medium, or rather the genre, so the original Silent Hill 2 is 2001 or 2002, something like that. It's 01. 3 years later, they start spinning up Resident Evil 4, and at the beginning of 2005, Resident Evil 4 comes out. This also coincides with the great genre narrowing of the late PlayStation 2 generation before the beginning of digital storefronts, where a lot of niche genres got either canceled entirely or got boiled down to their elements and fused into something else. With Resident Evil 4, it effectively smothered survival horror in its crib. There are a couple of other survival horror games after RE4, but they tend to be pretty cult stuff like Rule of Rose. And after that point, you didn't really see classic survival horror come back into the spotlight at all for a solid 10 years. Because it had been agreed upon by the community, so to speak, that survival horror was now behind-the-back action shooters like Resident Evil 4 and Dead Space and Resident Evil 5. Big, bombastic, gory third-person shooters. Fun for all of that, but a lot of the horror got minimized for the sake of mainstream exposure. I don't think it's so much that Silent Hill 2 is on a pedestal, as that there are a great many of fans and game developers who put classic survival horror on a pedestal, and it is fairly easy to find consensus that Silent Hill 2 is the apex of that old model. And while you can argue that it doesn't play very well and that many facets of it have aged terribly, in terms of atmosphere, emergence, storytelling, music, and just a general feeling of oppression, those are the things which set it apart from its contemporaries. There are other survival horror games that have much better combat. There are others that play better, but Silent Hill 2 can make you dread what's around the next corner better than almost anything else that was ever in the genre. After that point, even Silent Hill itself kind of falls off, because Silent Hill 3 is almost as good, I would argue, but does have a little bit more of an action focus and a little bit more comedy. And then Silent Hill 4 is one of the most divisive games out of the survival horror genre. And 4 is also when they disband Team Silent and start making distinctly weird off games after that point. So I think you're onto something with the idea of the pedestal, but I would argue about where the pedestal actually is.
I think that's probably a fair point. My counter argument slightly, because I don't think you're entirely wrong, is that if we're talking about Silent Hill 2 being a great survival horror game, see, and that's the thing, right? Like, people talk about it as a survival horror game, and it's not. It's a psychological horror game, and there's a distinction, right? Like, Resident Evil is a survival horror game by the very definition of what those words mean. Resident Evil, you're managing ammo, you have to, be concerned about the threat of the things that are trying to kill you.
Survival horror came from one of the botched translation moments in the first game in 1996. The term is from Resident Evil.
Right, yeah. Yeah, it's Enter the Survival Horror, right?
Yeah. Just throwing it out there for the audience.
Yeah. But I think, like, the interesting thing with what you're saying is if we talked about Silent Hill 2 as a psychological horror game, I think I would have more respect for the conversation at large. Not directed at anybody here, but my issue is that if we talk about it as a survival horror game, it's actually quite bad at being a survival horror game. It throws ammunition at you. You're never really in danger. Like, at a certain point, it just got comical while I was playing it, because it's like, ooh, spooky noise, there's a nurse. Okay, I have a shotgun, bitch. Like, you know what I mean? Like, please waddle over here so I can blow your head off. It's not, like, it doesn't... And I would argue that, yeah, the discomfort, I think, comes from the environment and not actually any of the enemies or any of the feeling of, like, oh my god, I could die, right? I could fail. That's never there. It has excellent puzzle design. That's another thing that we haven't talked about, and somehow this became like a Silent Hill 2 episode. But, yeah, I think, I don't know, I wish we collectively would reframe how we talk about the things that it does well, because it's not, we've made excuses for the gameplay. We've talked about, like, oh, it's not really a survival, like, maybe it's not really a survival horror game. Maybe we need to talk about it like that and talk about why the gameplay is the way that it is. And then, Gene Park said something along the lines of, I think was probably the most compelling argument I've heard for it, which was, maybe the game isn't trying to kill you, maybe it's just trying to make you suffer. And that is a more compelling argument to me of what Silent Hill 2 wants to do than it's a survival horror game, it just happens to be bad at it.
There's definitely an argument to be made that for pretty much the entire run of the franchise, Konami wanted a Resident Evil. So there's a great deal, especially in the first 4 games, which is there to play follow the leader with Resident Evil instead of focusing on the series' actual strengths. For the first 3 games in particular, yeah, you do get weighed down with plenty of ammo, plenty of guns, and remarkably effective melee weapons. The survival horror aspect of it is the rest of the game is trying to tell you that you cannot handle what's around the next corner. Intellectually, you can because you've got 500 shotgun shells. Mm-hmm. But even if the game belted you inside of a Gundam, it would still be able to convince you that you can't handle what's next because of everything else it's telling you. There's a very distinct a very distinct divide between what it's telling you can handle and what you think you can handle. Now, again, as I think I said to you in the Discord, I think the root of your objection is you're an academic, so you want people to make more academic distinctions.
That's probably true.
And while I think that's a valuable point to make, that, and for that matter, it's something that the remake rather specifically addresses, that it would be a better game as opposed to an experience if there was more risk of failure. I don't think I've ever died in the first 2 Silent Hill games. I know I have in the third one, but it's that complete dope slap of an encounter in the prologue, and I don't know if it counts. But yeah, it's very much a game that was always divided between what the executives wanted and what the developers wanted. The developers are very good at the psychological aspects of it, but they are kind of throwing everything else about the genre in there as a contractual obligation. It's got to have guns, it's got to have combat because it's a PlayStation 2 game, and they're not going to let us get away with a walking simulator for another 20 years.
Should I talk now? Are we good?
Yeah, I think if I can say one more thing, Brogan, before you talk.
Okay.
Brogan doesn't realize that this isn't his podcast anymore.
Yeah, we've taken over. What I want to say is, regardless of how you feel about Silent Hill 2, I do think you should play it. And if you've never played it, I especially think you should play it.
You don't have to do final thoughts, Will. I got like 15 minutes of Silent Hill shit.
I'm not doing final thoughts.
There was a third panelist.
I just want to say that I do think it's worth experiencing regardless. Brogan, go ahead.
Okay, alright, awesome. I just wrote down bullet points. I'm not gonna argue from the thing. I let two people do it so there would be one side, the other. Now I'm just gonna say shit I like or think about the game with these bullet points. Number one, regarding the ending, I actually kind of agree with how it climaxes, but I would definitely urge that repeat playthroughs are probably really good. One of the most interesting things about Silent Hill 2 is how you get endings. How you get endings do directly correspond with how you play. There are some that are adventure game elements where you gotta find the right item, but especially for your base first playthrough, they are based on how you function. One of the reasons why you have so many healing things is because there is an ending dedicated to you preserving yourself versus you not taking care of yourself.
My brother in Christ, I'm not going to interrupt you. You can breathe between sentences.
That's just how he talks.
Yeah, I just like that. I'm curious, Will, were you the person that I read write an opinion about discourse over old games and the problems gamers have regarding reevaluation? I feel like I read that somewhere. I definitely understand the concern regarding gamers not really reevaluating what they held dear when they were kids. Whereas like movies, you could go back and be like, wow, that was kind of bad. I see it. Whereas we no matter what, will hold the games of our childhood to our pedestals. I definitely see that as a valid thing beyond the academics here. But I think there's a lot of merit to the game still. I also don't think this is my favorite Silent Hill. I think I personally like Silent Hills 1 and 3 more. 3 especially to me is the marriage between the two. I feel like 1 has a unique style that I like living in more as a world. And what it's doing in those terms as a setting. And I like how 2's focus on character works. So when 3 does that with a more interesting and complex character, which is Heather, it pays off for me more. And action, a heavier focus on action and comedy kind of works for me. So that doesn't really disrupt anything for me. I feel like regards to execution, I feel like the two issues you had were, simplicity of themes or like higher standard of depth than the average player, and then polish, right? The combat is bad, the elements are bad, and I feel like there is a tightrope of whether or not it's appropriate for the moment. I do feel like there's an element of combat that's supposed to be bad. But I also feel like every other aspect is also meant to feed into discomfort. Like, for instance, the voice acting. The original voice acting of Silent Hill 2 was made largely by unprofessional actors. But they are still really, really good at conveying, for lack of better words, broken and confused people.
I found something interesting out about that the other day.
Go ahead.
The guy who they got to voice James Sunderland in the original version of Silent Hill 2 wasn't a professional actor. His daughter had been brought in to audition for the role of Laura. And for some reason, they asked him to read for James. His daughter didn't get the part, but he got the part of James.
That's funny.
Which probably comes up every Christmas.
Wow. Yeah. She's just mad. No. I think those, in general, those are my thoughts. But going into like the Silent Hill 2 remake, I'm very curious, both in terms of would it address Will's concerns regarding combat, and also it sort of is a litmus test for how anyone feels about a remake, because I don't think Silent Hill 2 original did need a remake, but it does focus on some things and makes certain things better. Thomas, do you want to talk a little bit about Silent Hill 2 Remake before I go into
Well, one thing that I kind of want to talk about in terms of that covers both the original, the remake, and Fear the Spotlight, for that matter, is that about 8 years ago now, I was at a conference where they were talking about narrative design in games. And one of the things about Silent Hill 2 in particular that jumps out at me is that its story is very emergent in a lot of crucial ways, which is a term that is typically used as a distinction to connotate parts of the story that the player has to independently realize from context, rather than being spelled out to you by dialogue or something you read. Much about Silent Hill 2 gets its impact from the sudden realization of what you're looking at. For example, like you mentioned, everything in the game is about James in some specific way, and for that matter, everything about that Eddie or Angela happen to be seeing, or Laura, is distinctly different. Laura is never scared of anything because as far as she's concerned, the town is empty. Something the remake calls an interesting amount of attention to is every time you see Eddie, his breath is frosted up. Because Eddie's Silent Hill 2 is always winter. And for that matter, the remake also does an interesting thing where whenever you're about to run into Angela, you start seeing the same apartment over and over again. These are just things that are there for you to notice them, but the game never makes a point of showing them to you. And I think that's a underrated part of Silent Hill 2's overall impact, is the way that it shows rather than telling, and it's still early enough in the medium's narrative evolution that showing rather than telling is something that we were still figuring out the rules for. With the remake, I think they did go a long way towards addressing Will's criticism of the combat being bad, because it's very much more limited, it's much easier to take a hit, it's much easier to die, but at the same time, it still keeps that ragged, desperate edge that the original had. You can make a lot of fun from James in the remake because he's got this dodge move which gives him hardy amounts of iframes, and so you can kind of Dempsey roll around every situation and beat the shit out of whatever you run into with a plank and never take a hit. But at the same time, it's impossible not to notice that he is this angry, frustrated, screaming madman who is just pummeling a mannequin into a stain. The game, the big problem I have with the remake over the original is I do think that the remake being about 2 to 3 times longer stretches the bit out about as far as it can go. That does give them space to do things like flesh out a couple of the endings. It gives Maria a lot more to do. There's a really fun sequence about a third of the way through the game where Maria can just follow you around for a while and comment on things. Gives a lot more meat on the bone for anybody who wants to get her ending, because you can start to see why James might have actually been gravitating towards her in the first place, as opposed to the original where it kind of comes out of nowhere. I think as a horror game and as a game, the remake is a fairly stark improvement on the original, even if it does start to wear out its welcome towards the end. I do have a more complicated reaction to it, but I can do that after you say what you'd like to say.
Yeah, there's a lot to go into regarding the remake. I feel like this is probably Bloober's best game, and I think you're the person, Thomas, that said like maybe it was the source material being much stronger, and them having the ability to not fuck it up like that on that foundational level, that they were able to have a good step forward and then they were able to keep going. I do think it is largely an improvement. One thing I wanted to cite here was like the combat. The combat is, yes, there is a dodge. I don't think the dodge is necessarily, iframe Bloodborne levels. I feel like it's appropriate enough, ? It definitely veers more into action. But even then, there's still a little bit of a tasteful jank. Like, for instance, the gunplay. James's gunplay is pretty bad, but you can feel like it is bad on purpose. And it feels appropriate and not necessarily frustrating.
I didn't notice until somebody pointed this out to me, but James' aim goes straight to fucking hell during the fight with Eddie, because that's the moment in which James is the most frightened he's been yet.
Also, in the first minutes of you having the gun, if you aim it, there's chances he'll misfire. Mm-hmm. Stuff like that is fun. I think also, like, I think the acting performances are actually really strong here. I think the best part of the game is probably the cutscenes. And it was the thing I was the most skeptical of, because I talked about the unprofessional actors and how it worked to make them feel more real and less real at the same time, make them a little more uncanny. Here, it's less uncanny, but because it's a little more grounded, the performances are very well done. Some better than others, but I think Angela in particular does a fantastic job, and James goes for a different thing, but I like the thing equally.
Yeah, if I had to point at somebody who I was the most impressed by, it would be the progression of Eddie, where the actor manages to take him from scared kid to in shock to slowly going crazy to just going completely around the twist around the time you fight him.
Yeah. I agree there. Regarding its length, yes, I definitely feel like it goes on too long. I feel like the puzzles were good, though. And again, the combat was good. So in the Will complaints of the game is fundamentally not good, I feel like Bloober addresses that, but also there's definitely something about it. I just still come away with the feeling like it didn't need to exist. I'm glad it doesn't suck, is where I land. I will play the game again down the road or what have you, but I enjoyed it.
Well, I have kind of a complicated relationship with it because I did the IGN guide. So I'm the one who had to play it 12 hours a day even when I didn't feel like it. So, which I think kind of burned me out on Halloween early this year because I'd been living inside James Sunderland's Nightmare Parade for too long. I'm really more interested in just watching some screwball comedies right now than doing any Halloween things. But to a certain extent, I like that it exists because I think Bloober has been trying for a win for so long that I'm glad they got one finally. And because they've been just giving it a shot for so long, and every once in a while, even if you hate the team, you want to see them take one home. But more to the point, the thing which really struck me about it is it's a game about not being able to move on. But for all of its characters, not being able to... James can't move on from Mary's death. Angela can't move on from her childhood trauma. Eddie can't move on from his childhood trauma, which eventually expresses itself violently. And therefore, going back to remake it this faithfully 23 years after the fact feels both like an absolute expression of respect and love for the source material and a bunch of fans finally getting their shot at the brass ring. And it also feels like they fundamentally missed the overall point of the game.
I was about to say, I think that's the thing that stands out the most to me, which is, I think, a larger indictment of the industry than maybe Konami or Bloober specifically. But I do think it is ironic that, like, a game that is very faithful, it seems like... I have not played the remake yet. I would like to at some point. To its source material... that is that game about that stuff being remade that way by a team who has basically been like, we want to do Silent Hill forever, is like a level of irony that you can't write. Because people would tell you it's too on the nose.
Truth is stranger than fiction because fiction has to make sense.
Makes sense. Yep.
To some extent, I do think that they might have been better off doing some kind... Like, if the fans hadn't already done the HD mod for Silent Hill 2, then I think I would have been a little more comfortable with Bloober doing that. I would have even been okay if they'd done something like a remix edition where they changed all the puzzle solutions and maybe remix, like, enemy positioning. And the idea of going back into Silent Hill 2 and bringing its combat up to parity with the current state of the genre is not a bad idea on the face of it. But, yeah, I don't think I can escape that central irony that the industry can't move on from things. The genre can't move on from things. Bloober can't move on from this. Because, to a certain extent, their last 4 or 5 games have all been audition pieces to do this.
Yeah.
There is a letter in the hotel. I do not think it is in the original. I think it's for the one ending. I haven't gotten that ending, but it's the Bliss ending where it says the only way to escape is to stay in. I feel like many have surrendered to not trying to escape.
Yeah, I got that one. It's kind of interesting. Bloober did add 2 new endings in the remake, both of which are actually pretty interesting. And one of the Bliss ending, have you seen it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
The Bliss ending has James slugging back an entire bottle of the hallucinogen from the first game, and then just losing himself in this lotus delusion of always being on vacation with Mary in the time covered by the videotape, and then it cuts back to the room he's in, and he's disappeared. And I think...
And I guess my framing here is if the industry is stuck... I guess they are happily stuck for the moment. I guess. I don't know how else to say that.
And I think that to a certain extent, there is a file you can find at one point in the apartment building which, now that we're talking about the central ironies of the remake, there's a file you can point... It's right before the wardrobe trap. There's a point where you can go through a secret door and it immediately shuts you in and you're stuck there until you solve a puzzle. But there's a note on the table in front of that door that says something along the lines of, you might think I'm cruel, but I've seen you make this mistake again and again and again. Nothing's going to change this time.
I will say, if Will thinks the original game was not subtle, I feel like the remake is even more not subtle.
Listen, sometimes you gotta whack people over the head with a lead pipe. Whether they're nurses or not. No, I get it, and you know, I do want to play the remake, and maybe that's a podcast for when I have.
This podcast has never whacked a single nurse over the head with a lead pipe and does not stand for that behavior.
Can we have Thomas narrate all our future podcasts?
We don't have the budget for that.
You really don't.
Yeah. Okay. All right, guys. This week's game of the week is Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem. Released in 2002 for the GameCube. Developed by Silicon Knights, the developers behind the original Legacy of Kain game, Blood Omen. And published by Nintendo. It was originally developed for the Nintendo 64, but then moved to the GameCube, and is an action/adventure/horror game in the limited camera style of Resident Evil. The game is about a woman named Alex investigating the brutal death of her grandfather and exploring the family mansion. She comes across a forbidden tome and, as a growing narrative, collects pages from a book detailing humans throughout time who have had possession of the book. The player will play as many characters in different eras and vignettes, often revisiting the same locations at different times and fighting back against the evil Pius, a servant to an ancient god. There are heavy literary influences found within the game's story. The game's combat has expanded melee options from typical games in the genre, primarily with a limb system. It also has many unique or expanded mechanics for the genre, such as a diverse but intuitive magic system, alternative playthroughs for different cutscenes and enemies, and an insanity meter, which has become a key bullet point critics and fans look to. The game sold poorly at the time, but is now considered a classic. Gentlemen, what did we think of Eternal Darkness?
I'm really sad that we never got more Eternal Darkness. I will say that. But I'm also kind of happy about it, right? Like, it's kind of beautiful that it gets to be like a one-off.
It also doesn't really end in a place that would justify a sequel unless it was a prequel.
That's true. I don't want to say like another Eternal Darkness. I would just like more games like Eternal Darkness. I think it's cool for a lot of reasons, and I'm sure we'll discuss these in depth, but like I like the frame narrative that it uses to like explore all these different periods through history. I love that it lets you play as so many different characters in so many different places. I love that there's different gods. I love that there's all of these like ways that it fucks with you with the sanity meter. Eternal Darkness is truly like in an era where I don't feel like we get a lot of unique video games in the AAA space anymore. Like there is nothing else quite like Eternal Darkness, which is really cool.
One of the things that struck me replaying a fair amount of it for the podcast is I have this bugbear that I bring up every once in a while about how Lovecraft is a very popular inspiration for video games, but when they actually base games directly on him, there's this tendency to run his classic scenarios like it's his greatest hits album. It's something which really calcified for me after I played that Call of Cthulhu game that Cyanide made a few years ago.
Yes.
Where
I'll concur on
it
this.
just kind of trots out all of the same monsters and scenarios and places and things in a row, like it's expecting an audience pop in between each of them. And Eternal Darkness, you know, is obviously a lot older than that. Is actually, I think, a couple of years older than that Dark Corners of the Earth game for Xbox, which was one of the first, if not the first, console Lovecraft games. But it's very much drawing on that same sense of human insignificance that powered Lovecraft, but it's doing its own thing with its own mythology and takes it off in its own direction. And I think that there could stand to be a great deal more of that. And if
100%.
And if I had to point at one thing about the entire game, and there are plenty of things I like about it, but if I had to point at one thing about it, it's absolutely that sense of we don't have to play all the hits. We can just take Lovecraft's basic template and do our own thing with it without feeling as though we have to abide by this set of invisible rules that even Lovecraft himself didn't abide by.
Yeah, I really actually like want to very quickly, and then I'm gonna let other people talk. Like second that, because Lovecraft is just for everything, right? Like Lovecraft has become the these massive like outer gods that like you can't really comprehend, and like people really love to pull from that idea. But a lot of the stuff that you see, especially in games that like uses Lovecraft, is very slavishly devoted to like the way Lovecraft envisioned those ideas, which is problematic because the man was a virulent racist.
Yes.
But also it's like bad storytelling. And, it would be like if every adaptation of Dracula wrote Dracula, or like even Castlevania, like envisioned Dracula the same way as Bram Stoker, which is not the way that it works, right? Or vampires were all like very slavishly devoted to that. And I think games are very guilty of this more than other mediums. And so like to see something like Eternal Darkness be like, that's a cool idea. We don't really care how you did it. We're just like this idea, and we're gonna play with it. And I think, especially horror games could use more stuff that is Lovecraft inspired, but we're very willing to be its own thing because we don't see as much of that as we do, like zombies, monsters, that kind of stuff.
I'll tell you what I thought was funny after a conversation I had with Will on his podcast a few weeks ago. I don't think I saw another game that so flagrantly fucked with the player through deliberate game mechanics through the sanity meter until mouthwashing.
Save the sanity meter talk. we're going to say that. Continue.
Well,
Okay.
No, but I like the point that he's making, because mouthwashing does that too.
and I don't think I saw it again. So it was 21 years, 22 years.
It's a long time.
Yeah.
Murph, how'd you feel about the game?
I remember this episode came about because when we were doing Crimson Butterflies, we did a Variety Minute just talking about horror games from this era. And Thomas and Will were just, like, dropping details about Eternal Darkness I had never heard mentioned about the game before, because whenever I hear about this game, it's always in the context of, oh, the sanity meter. But to me, like, the sanity meter's, like part one of, like, a 3-piece soup that this game is bubbling together.
It's
also
a single layer, I would say.
Yeah, because it's also this pulp, like, adventure story. It's got this grand focus spanning hundreds of years and different places and periods and times, and then also just, like, the magic system is really dope. And I'm just shocked that I've never heard people, like, talk about it in that context. Like, yeah, we need more games that mess with the player the way the sanity meter does in this, but also I kind of want more games that do the magic system like this game does.
The magic system in Eternal Darkness is super dope.
I would be happier with it if there was a more active way to regenerate mana. Because
I can buy that.
Because one of my key moments of remembering my original playthrough is that one boss fight where you can only damage your enemy through using one of the big damage spells. And so there's a lot of just running in circles praying for your magic to come back in between salvos.
That's the World War I where you're the photographer. I don't think I lost my train of thought. Someone else say something.
Okay, I've got some takes here. First of all, one of my big takeaways from the game this time around was I played this slightly less intended to be spooked. I don't think the game is particularly scary in that sense, but I played it like Blood Omen, like seriously, where I think every room or everything was not necessarily a new idea, sometimes it was, but a new experience or a new thing, and the switching between characters really helps with that. I feel like you take like a Resident Evil and you take a mansion and you choose 2 characters at the start of the game, and they took that essence of a setting and optional characters and they built games around them where they built vignettes and settings, and you explore with different characters. They play differently, not necessarily through stats, although sometimes some walk slower than others, etc., but it's also like what weapons they have, how good are the weapons, what is the level shaped around and like. Stuff like that I really love, and especially when you revisit as different characters, there's a good interplay between it all that I really, really enjoy. I loved this game.
I remembered what I was going to say in regards to the magic system, which was partway through, I was reminded of Blood Omen, and then I, in the same moment, remembered, right, this is the same people. This was like their next game. And I think 100%. The people at Silicon Knights, I don't know if they would be the best player characters to get as a DM for your D&D campaign, or the worst, because it seems like they would go all spellcaster and just try to hack every scenario. But they very much are in favor of giving the player a lot of tools to kind of bypass a lot of the challenge in a way where it feels like I, as the player, am outsmarting the design. Like, I think when you're playing as the architect in the Forbidden City, there's this hallway you need to walk down where the floor hurts you. And I was trying to puzzle out, like, is there a way I turn this off? Do I dispel the spell? And then I thought, I have this, like, shield spell that absorbs damage for a certain number of hits. Can I, like, cast that and just run down the hall? And I did, and that's probably what the intended solution was, but I feel like I found a workaround, like I sequence broke or something. And that's very empowering to the player.
Yeah, I think the other thing, right, is Bro and Murph hit a really good point here, which is that one of the cool things about Eternal Darkness, because it plays in so many different eras and with so many different characters and with so many different variations of the magic that basically incentivize you to explore and play, and what if I did this? I think what it does that a lot of horror games struggle with is it's really good at variety. And it's pretty well paced, too, because of that. Because you never spend too long in a place. It's always moving you to the next thing, right? And so, because of this, because after you get kind of into a rhythm with the game and you realize, like, hey, I'm not going to spend a ton of time with this, it also incentivizes you to explore and play and try these other things, because you don't know if you're going to come back to that character. Most of the time you don't, right? So, I think that's a very conscious design choice, and I don't think we talk about it enough. That we are going to use these things and the way that these levels are designed and the way that these characters are to give the player a variety of sequences that are probably not otherwise possible.
Mm-hmm. I think to a slight detriment to the game is that when you do get involved in combat, the combat is pretty straightforward and easy. I didn't use a lot, if any, of the ranged weapons in this game, because whatever sword they give you, and I love that this game tickles the part of my brain that's memorized 100 different things we've called a sword throughout time and history, is you just enchant that and go for a headshot, and that will usually one-shot most of the rabble you come across, unless it's a mid-boss, in which case you kind of need to be a little trickier with the spell system.
You know, something I didn't realize back in the day, and I realized it while I was playing it today, is that I used to really hate replaying the game because of Elia's scenario, because her weapons were comparatively bad. And I didn't realize back in the day that the blowgun was poisonous.
Yeah.
So that you can just walk around and poison each individual enemy and then just hang out in the far corner while they lurch towards you and die.
Yeah.
Also, that hallway with the blow thing has, like, traps, so you can just walk in and let them hit the traps. So, like, I feel like it's very doable.
Yeah, there's also the issue where if you let something else kill an enemy, then you don't get the sanity boost for finishing them off. So you've really got to balance that against it, because if your sanity gets too low, you do start taking damage.
Yeah. Most of the times that I died in this game were because I got greedy trying to get the finishing blow.
Yeah, I think that also, like, the sanity meter, and again, I know we're going to talk about more in detail, but I do like the idea that, like, the way the sanity meter is built and what causes it to go down, I think make combat interesting, because to Murph's point, like, the combat usually isn't very challenging, but you have to approach it thoughtfully because of the impact, not on your health, but on the sanity meter, right? And I think that's a really cool decision of, you know, if we view health as a resource, and this is the fighting game player in me talking, that allows us to get to the thing that we want, right, which is progression. I think taking that resource and being like, no, actually, this isn't what you need to worry about most of the time. It's this other thing, and this thing is very different than the way games have trained you to think about health and the way you are interacting with the environment. I think that's a really cool decision, and more games should do that.
I think in general, the limb combat, like, yes, it's simple and straightforward, and most of the time you're going to go for the head as fast as you can, especially because if you get it before they do the thing, you don't have to lose insanity when you see Buddy. But I feel like it's good enough to be engaging throughout, and it is an evolution of what we typically see in monsters in a hallway horror. And I feel like, I guess we can lead into it, but I also agree with how the insanity meter functions specifically by the finishing enemies off to ensure you're not going to run away. If you run away from every enemy, then it will go down. And because of that, there is a moment that forces you to engage, as opposed to a Silent Hill, where it is much more a stick in the road, you know?
Yeah. Yeah,
I do want to shout out the fact that it still controls remarkably well for a game from 2000.
Yes.
Yeah, it does. It also just, like, yeah, I mean, to Thomas's point, but, like, I think it feels just generally, like, pretty refined in a way from that, like, games from that era don't, while being, like, very experimental, right? And I feel like as games have gone on, especially, like, horror games, and to Thomas's point earlier when we talked about Silent Hill 2, about how the genre has, like, gone a very specific direction, and largely for a long time until indies came back and they were like, what if we did this? Like, games as a whole have gotten to the point where, like, we've refined control schemes, we have an idea of what mechanics we want to play with, and so on and so on and so on. But Eternal Darkness is one of those weird games where it's like, here's a cool new thing that we did, while also being like, this game functions the way that you think it should, and it functions well, and it controls well. And that is really unique and you don't see that very much. And I feel like we can't talk about that without being like, that is a really impressive design accomplishment.
It's like an interesting thing talking about like Silent Hill 2 and Signalis and Resident Evil, and how people talk about the design in those games being oppressive, like, oh, it's clunky on purpose so that the horror sells. But here, the game, like the actual meat and potatoes gameplay, how you interface with it, is really solid and polished. And then the oppressive nature comes from the sanity effects being oppressive to you.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I guess we can talk about it now. I feel like a really good thing that I was able to put into words finally, once you talked about Silent Hill 2, you guys, was the intellectually you're safe bit about most horror games. I feel like the insanity meter is that layer. It's not only breaking the fourth wall. It's about intellectually attacking things that the gamer cares about if he is not fully immersed. Like, all the other stuff in a game works when you're immersed and you're in. But if you're ever out of it, the way this game snaps you back in is like, oh no, we're going to pretend to reset your game. And then you care again, because that's a tangible stake for you, the human being. Or there's ammo in the room, and I'm going to take all this ammo. Psych, it's an illusion. We're going to take away your reward. Those things are punishing to you personally. And I feel like that adds a horror element that is not explored nearly enough.
Yeah.
You know, I was talking to a friend of mine on Discord before I sat down to record this, and he was talking about how his primary memory of Eternal Darkness is he'd walked into a room, saw he was safe, pulled up his inventory, and immediately spent about 10 minutes experimenting with all of his various runes and sigils to try to figure out all the spells he could before moving forward, just getting his ducks in a row because he knew he'd need them all sooner or later. Then went back to the game, took 2 steps forward. Turned out he was in a hallucination the entire time. When the Sanity effect ended, all of the stuff that he'd done in his inventory no longer applied.
Yeah. Like, it's not just that they do things like that, like they psych you out with thinking, oh, there's ammo where there isn't, or there's a knock at the door, but no one's there. They get really fun with it. Like, you'll end a chapter, and like the screen will pop up saying, look forward to seeing the conclusion in Edge of Eternal Darkness 2.
It's like an end of the demo or something.
Yeah. Or like, you go to save, and it's like, oh, your save's corrupted, we're deleting it. Or you'll use a healing item, but the healing item will actually kill you. Or there's a fly on your screen. Like, this is the only time in a horror game where I felt like, no, I don't want my meters to be full and capped off, because I want to see the more cool stuff it does when I have low sanity.
Yeah, and there's, it gets really weird. I'm actually looking at before we did this show, I watched a YouTube video to remind me of how many there were. And the video that I'm looking at catalogs 42 of them. And there's crazy ones that you wouldn't even think of here. There's one of them like sound of something knocking at a door. You come into the room on the ceiling. Your character gets bigger as they walk. Enemies get smaller.
Yeah.
The statues turn their head to look at you. There's blood on the walls. Your limbs come off slowly, right? There's a lot of really cool things that play with this. And to like Bro's point and to Murph's point, like, some of them are there to fuck with you, the player, right? Like, there's the CRT thing, like there's one with like the video thing, the Metal Gear Solid video kind of gag.
Yes.
But a lot of them are also like, this is weird, this is it shouldn't work this way, and some of them are very subtle. And some of them are like, oh.
Yeah, there's one where you like sink into the floor, and in a very like no-clip way. Where it's like, the game is breaking.
Every time the no-clip effect happened to me, it fooled me. I was like, oh no, this old game is bugging out. And then the joke's on me for believing that.
Yes.
Yeah, I routinely get the one in the Cambodia level when you're playing as the guy with the scimitar, where his head explodes. And then the game just goes on as normal for a couple of minutes before resetting.
Yeah.
But the one that consistently sticks with me is still... there's one when you're playing as Edward where you go down a ladder and you end up in a asylum cell.
Yeah.
Mm.
Just like his ancestor did. Mm-hmm. The ones that are more very customized to the character you're playing at the time are the ones that always stuck with me. There's one completely cheap jump scare when you first access the second floor of the manor as Alex.
The bathtub.
The bathtub.
That's fun.
Yeah.
That's so fun.
That is a fun.
I think
there's
and it's so quick that I needed to go back through it again to realize what it was supposed to be. Just because you only see the face of the body in the bathtub for about a second.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the other thing, right, is, and I want to bring this up before I forget about it, is that a lot of this stuff is very based on what the player perceives are things that might happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, the player perceives that their saves might be deleted. The player perceives that the game might blue screen of death. It perceives that a character might clip, or there's something buggy might happen. You perceive that, your TV could turn off, right? Mm-hmm. And it's all very built on the technology at the time where this game was released on the GameCube, right? Like the little video thing in the upper right doesn't really work on a modern television. Mm-hmm. The CRT effect of the screen turning off doesn't work on a modern TV because that's not how modern TVs turn off.
Or that super blocky 2002 volume meter.
Yes. Right? Like, it's very much of its time in the same way that I don't know, I haven't done the research, but I would be shocked if Silicon Knights, a team that would end up working on the Twin Snakes, did not take a lot of this stuff from
Psychomantis.
Yeah, from specifically Psychomantis and working on Twin, or like being fans of Metal Gear Solid. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. And I think that that's the thing that makes it work, is that they're not trying to like emulate. There's the video one is a clear nod to the Psychomantis fight. But like they're not trying to just be like, look, we're like Metal Gear. They're like, this is a really cool thing that Kojima and his team did for one fight. What if we built an entire system around this? Yeah. And we went crazy with it. And that is a really cool way of designing it. And I think, again, this doesn't really happen anymore. But I try to think of how you could do this in a game like this today. It would have to be like, oh, your Xbox kicks you back to like the main menu, right? It would, you get disconnected from Xbox Live. Like, it would be completely different.
I think about Doki Doki Literature Club and how that game messed with your knowledge of how, like, little indie computer games work, where you actually have to go in, like, you would go into the files and you can find special notes there. And when that game was ported to consoles, they had to do away with that and instead give you, like, a fake desktop that you could interact with the game files in. And that takes away so much from, I guess, the psychological element to it. It kind of plays the hand a bit too much of, like, if I have foreknowledge that I'm playing this game through a fake desktop, at some point the fake desktop is going to come into play.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And, the other thing here that I think bears repeating is that Nintendo published this, and Nintendo is extremely aware of designing games around their hardware and what their hardware can do. And I would be really shocked, again, I don't know if this is true, but if during the development of this, where I'm assuming they've worked very closely with Silicon Knights, where Nintendo was like, oh, this is cool, what can we play with?
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. And, like, it is a very Nintendo design philosophy and very Kojima design philosophy to be like, the medium is also part of the message. The delivery of the game, the fact that it's on a GameCube, the fact that you're playing it on a television, is part of the way that we can communicate what we want to communicate with the player. Most games don't do that.
Yeah.
right? Like, we talk about games using the fact that they are games to tell a story in a way no other medium can do. Eternal Darkness is one of the best examples of that, because it is willing to not only play with the fact that it is a video game, but that it is a video game running on hardware.
Yes. It reminds, like, I saw a streamer talking about the recent Astrobot game, and how it actually frustrated him, because he was like, all these, like, tricks and things you can do with the DualSense, we could have been doing that the entire time, and just haven't. Like, blowing into the microphone to, like, snuff out torches, or using the adaptive triggers and stuff. And it's like, yeah.
Nintendo's been doing this since the dawn of fucking time.
Yes, yeah. Exactly.
And Kojima, you know, how many other games have been brave enough to use a controller port, where the controller is, or how the controller is synced, right? Like,
yeah,
that stuff. And for some reason we've stopped doing it, and I don't understand it.
Because games are cinema now, Will.
I think it's a money thing of, like, it's the multi-plat, and it's a business decision.
It's 100% a money thing.
Yeah.
It's just, it's... I've said this before, I'll say it again. I don't want to get off on a tangent about this, but it really makes me sad that we used to be so experimental with what we could do with the medium because of what the medium was, and we just don't do it anymore.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because a bunch of the stuff that was... I mean, remember, we're talking right now about a game that was an unequivocal sales failure.
I get it. I know. I understand that part of it. I just don't care. Like,
he wants to live in the other timeline.
I want to live in the timeline where the art matters more than how much money it makes.
Speaking of other timeline, I like how this game does new games, and, like, the optional choice at the start of which god Pius goes for is super fun.
Mm-hmm.
I want to hear...
And how that changes everything afterwards.
Yeah, Thomas was going to say something before we got on the god subject. I want to go back to the god subject, but I want to hear what Thomas was going to say.
Oh, I was about to think out loud about this game that I was trying to remember if I'd talked about it here on this podcast before, but Way Forward has a game that was on the WiiWare called Lit.
No, I can't recall you talking about this.
There was a whole gimmick in that game about how you would occasionally be able to find your way to a phone that was ringing in every room of the game. And it was really exploiting the tinny voice quality of the microphone and of the speaker and the Wiimote to make it sound kind of ethereal and creepy. Not that there were any additional effects, it was like the Wii's speaker was very good at making something sound like it was coming from a cheap landline.
Yeah,
that's something No More Heroes did in its original release, was you had to use the Wiimote like a phone.
But yeah, Lit is a puzzle game about this kid who's been trapped in his high school after dark, and for some reason that I don't believe the game ever actually gets into, the shadows are alive with some malevolent force, and if at any point he ever strays into the shadow out of whatever light he can find, he gets dragged under and killed. So the game is a puzzle horror sequence about finding ways to get from point A to point B by manipulating your environment to create safe pools of light in which to stand.
That's cool.
There is a game by that name from that developer on Steam right now, but it is a port of the mobile version. It's not the original Wii version. The original Wii version is dead.
That's a common problem with these. Like, for instance, I wanted to see the Castlevania Adventure Rebirth come out. WiiWare is a graveyard of lost content.
Yeah. Did you see that a bunch of the non-canon Castlevania characters are in that Vampire Survivors DLC?
This is not a Castlevania podcast. We'll have to leave in like 30 minutes.
Yeah,
continue.
Right.
I'm glad you said something. I was going to be like, I'm gonna get in so much trouble.
Okay.
No.
All right.
We're good.
Eternal Darkness. Back on track. You're right.
So with the gods, who
the gods?
Will has a souffle in the oven.
The best
color
god.
did you pick?
Go ahead.
What color did you pick? I went green.
I just want to say before we do this, I love how the magic system is color-coded, so I don't have to remember fucking names. I went red for Pius. I like the purple one the most because he's the Grand Master that just sits back and planned the timeline shit. It's great. 10 out of 10.
I played Shaturga because I'm colorblind and have to remember the names.
I think I also did red on my first playthrough. I think it's cool that like that choice is not just like a fun little like pick a thing that influences a couple of things. Like it influences a lot of stuff.
Yes.
That, and you were talking earlier about the way that the magic system lets you implement things which feel like they ought to be exploits. And how there's that thing you can do in Edwin's level where you can find Mantarok as a rune. Mm-hmm. And casting the spells with him, empowering them, tends to twist them around in some crazy way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I didn't know this. What?
Yeah. It's so cool.
There's a hidden chamber in Edwin Lindsay's level, which is the 1980s archaeologist guy.
Oh, it's probably up that path I never went or re-explored.
And you can find a rune which lets you cast spells that are aligned with Mantarok, the corpse god, as opposed to any of the three big ones that Pius might be serving. And when you empower a spell with Mantarok, it tends to have a distinctly different effect. The one I remember offhand is the spell that reveals invisible things. Turns you invisible when you cast it with Mantarok.
Whoa.
Which snaps a lot of the combat over its knee.
That is so Blood Omen, where you can just find, like, the most busted spell hidden away in, like, the corner of the map. But, that's cool. That's so cool.
In a game where a lot of the combat difficulty is about enemies looking at you, now they can't see you.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, but because it's been a couple years since I played through Eternal Darkness. I did a kind of some reading and
brush up.
Yeah, like some brush up for this. But isn't there a thing where if you play like a new game and you can do all three, if you do all three, you get like a fourth god that you can do? Isn't that?
There's an ending. There's an ending where it's Mantarok.
Yes.
Saying it was all his plan. He combines the timelines where because like when you beat the final boss, which is Pius, his god, which you chose, is beaten by the god that is supposed to beat it. It's like rock, paper, scissors with colors. And so when you do all three playthroughs, the purple guy, Mantarok, is like, he combines the endings. He's like, now everyone's dead. Because he's going to die in like 100 years or whatever. So
yeah, he said something along the lines of, these individual gods are too big for a single timeline. So if one of them is defeated in one timeline, it counts across all of them. Mm-hmm. So by beating the game 3 times with each god, you have effectively engineered a scenario where they took each other out across these 3 timelines. And once Mantarok is dead, then the world will actually be free of the darkness.
That's what I'm thinking of. Yeah, it's also like, again, a really cool little thing that just is in Eternal Darkness and like not in anything else. Man, Eternal Darkness is
also speaking of the ending, something I wanted to be sure to highlight while we were talking about it is Eternal Darkness might have one of the single most satisfying boss fights of anything of its generation.
Mm-hmm. The one with
the way in which when everybody comes back to take their swing at him.
Yeah, I dug that. I dug that the fight with Pius, he was using like the same spells you were. It's like one of those boss fights where they have the same tools that you do, so you're kind of counterplaying one another. That's real neat.
I think, talking about this and just talking about like the way that Silicon Knights, like a lot of their games have these systems that would kind of like bleed into their later games. This is just off topic, but we're thinking about this like, man, that studio didn't get its due, and they might have one of the best 3-game runs ever between Legacy of Kain, Eternal Darkness, and Twin Snakes. Just a thought. But yeah, man, like, and I think the other thing, like, we talk about how games are often, its design works together, or like these elements complement each other, but everything, Eternal Darkness is holistic. Like, everything points you to the same thing in a way that, Silent Hill 2, which we've talked about as something I also admire, like everything points towards James. Everything in Eternal Darkness is built around what is happening, from the frame narrative to the characters you plan. It all matters. It all comes back to the god you choose, right? To how you manage your sanity meter. Like, all of this stuff is coherent and unified and there to serve a single purpose, which is to make Eternal Darkness feel the way that it does. Nothing is there because it like doesn't fit, and I think that's a really also kind of a lost art in a lot of ways.
Yeah, especially the fact that like any other game you'd be like, oh, this is a really cool thing, I wish it was better. This game is like, no, this is a really cool thing and it's good, and that level of standard is missed greatly in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. And
I think
go ahead.
I would say like Like, yeah, it is a very lean game. Like, any chapter's only really an hour, 45 minutes, depending on what you know what to do. I imagine this game's pretty easy to, like, speed run, like an original Resident Evil, if you just know where everything is.
That was something that really jumped out at me playing it today, as I remembered it as being a lot longer.
Mm-hmm. I think that the only argument I could really make is, like, maybe you could cut, like, one or two of the chapters. I'm not sure which ones, because they all kind of have the same level of importance, especially in how they loop back into each other. Like, you'll encounter a character you previously played as, in, like, what they're doing now is, like, a wraith or a zombie, etc. What were the consequences of their actions?
If I was going to point at one of the chapters that I would probably cut, it would probably be Anthony.
Yeah.
If only because he is a elongated tutorial for the magic system.
Yeah.
I will say, though, I do like how the tutorials function in this, as the vignettes at the start are very short and are meant to introduce you to concepts. Anthony's is a little but I personally enjoyed how I didn't beat you over the head with it. It was just like, it was done, let's move on.
Mm-hmm. That was because he's, like, what, the second, like, chapter you do. I was definitely like in a state early on with the game where I was like, okay, but what did that matter? I guess he's just like this little French boy trying to save Charlemagne.
Although I suppose the other point you can make is that in terms of the influence that Pius is supposed to have, the fact that apparently he can relatively casually arrange for the assassination of Charlemagne is, if you know your history, a fairly big deal.
Well, yeah, hey man, it happens to have an elder god on your side, you know?
Powerful friends in powerful places. Yes, I love this game, man. I will say the one area where I'm like, yeah, this is kind of meh, is gunplay. But the thing about gunplay is that also feels like an intentional jank, because the earliest guns are the worst guns and the best guns are the latest guns. Yes. And it feels very real in that sense, where it's like, when you have the fucking flintlock, you're fucking reloading a flintlock.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That was definitely where you play as Michael in 1991, and you've got that multi-purpose assault rifle that never really took off.
Yeah.
It's a real-world gun, but it's got, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and under some grenade launcher, 2 different types of ammunition, and it turns out that the raw power of the American military budget is pretty much a match for Lovecraftian horror.
I mean, it should be.
Well, that was there is this book that I have in my role-playing game collection. This is not a deviation, called GURPS Cthulhu Punk.
Yes, I'm familiar.
Which is a mixture of Lovecraftian nightmares with cyberpunk mechanics. The connecting factor being that they are both genres that are known for characters with extraordinarily short lifespans. Mm-hmm. And somebody makes the point in there that in one of Lovecraft's original stories, Cthulhu gets convinced to fuck off by somebody crashing a ship into him.
Yeah, that was the biggest surprise to me reading Call of Cthulhu for the first time. It was like, they just rammed a boat into him and he's done?
Yeah, and then if you fast forward 70 or 80 years, you can fit that kind of kinetic impact into the back of a van.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And if you go a little bit further than that, then it fits into a shoulder holster.
Yep.
But the rate at which they had to amp the challenge as weapons get better is kind of another underrated factor.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to linger, because I think we've covered most of the really cool stuff that Eternal Darkness does, but I do think that, like... it's just so cool! Yeah, why don't we have more things like this?
Hell, why isn't it on the Switch Online right now?
Right? Like, it should be, and that is another thing, and I'm going to go on my game preservation rant for just a second, but, like, there is absolutely no reason that someone should not be able to give Nintendo money and play Eternal Darkness. It is ridiculous. And the game has become, I think, about $100 on eBay, and if you are, also runs great on Dolphin for anybody who really wants to play it. I think it's worth your time, but it is crazy to me that someone cannot be like, listen to this podcast and be like, wow, Eternal Darkness sounds really cool, I really want to play it, and not have to either jump through the hoop of spending a bunch of money, right, and then hooking up a GameCube or a Wii, or, downloading Dolphin and doing all the stuff that you have to do. And Dolphin's a great emulator. Like, it's fairly easy to use, but still, it should just be easy to get this. And Eternal Darkness is so important in terms of its design that it's a loss for people not just to be able to see it and appreciate what it does. It would be something similar if you couldn't just play the original Metal Gear Solid, right? Because so many things are like, man, what if we played with this mechanic that was introduced in this game? And it's horrible that it's been relegated to like a curiosity.
That is definitely something that playing it today brought forward to me, is that it is so free of jank compared to games that were being released at roughly the same time. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have tank controls. Yep. It's 2002.
The camera is also really good. It's articulated angles, but it solves the problem of no tank controls and articulated angles by like sweeping the camera and moving the camera properly with the character really well.
Never had like the Resident Evil issue of not being able to see what I was shooting at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Although there are a couple of moments where they do amp up the tension by forcing you to walk directly into a trap or an enemy. I remember there's a bit in Ella's game where you have to navigate the same trap-filled corridor where you can't quite see what you're walking towards, and it's pretty tense.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Crash Bandicoot angle. Yeah.
But that's also like the decision to make the game so readable through its camera, to then take that away from you, like builds tension, plays with the player, right? And so it's as smart as a design choice, because you have told people that this is not something we're normally going to show you, and so when you choose to show it to them like that, it changes their perspective on that sequence. It gets them a little bit more like, oh, I don't like this, And I think, again, like, what makes Eternal Darkness cool is the way that it is so conscious of what it's doing and so aware of the way in which it's going to play and the effects it's going to have, and the way it's using its hardware and the way it's using what it knows that hardware is going to be played on, which is a CRT TV. All this stuff is like everything in the game. Even the way the instruction booklet is like a reference to like a collection of notes, if I'm remembering correctly.
And every bit of the inventory and status screens are drawn in like a handwritten font to look like they're pages from the book.
Yes.
Yeah, the level of detail in Eternal Darkness is crazy, especially for the time, but even by today's standards.
Mm-hmm. Although it is kind of funny to think about an Eternal Darkness in 2024 where you walk into a room, pull out your gun, and the game suddenly puts up a pop-up that says $6.99 for 50 bullets.
Oh my god, that would be so good. That would be so good.
Eternal Darkness 2 should do fake market transactions for your fucking thing.
Oh my god, that's so
your
good.
credit card has gone through. Wait, what? No. The season pass has been purchased.
We have just charged you $89.99 for... You walk into the next room and your character is in a very slightly different outfit.
Right.
Oh,
like,
no.
Or like if you're playing as like a female character, it's like, you have bought the swimsuit collection.
Oh, no.
Like Day
I was actually thinking of the Mortal Kombat 1 monetization where it's got 50 different quote-unquote skins, but it's just the same outfit color shifted 100 times.
Oh. If it was on PC, it'd have webcam on, like on the corner.
Yeah.
Oh, that'd be great.
Oh yeah, you suddenly started streaming to Discord, and then your controllers invert. Your controls invert.
The monsters now have proximity chat.
Oh my god!
I have to.
Oh, the whatever platform you're playing on, the UI pops up and then won't go away, but you're getting your ass kicked.
There's controller drift.
The wrong UI pops up, so if you're playing on PlayStation, you get Xbox inputs.
Drift would piss me off so much. Anyways, guys, I think
there is one, like I was saying at the start of this, I have not seen another indie horror game play with that sort of fucking with the player until this year with the indie game Mouthwashing.
Yes. Mouthwashing is really cool.
There you go.
Which is really cool, but it also likes to do scene transitions by looking like you've got bad screen tearing.
Yeah.
So just I'm hoping this is on the comeback.
Yes, go play mouthwashing. I'm sorry, guys. I have to go. Can we wrap up?
Can we do plugs or no?
Yes, quickly.
Okay. All right. Will, where can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter at @ByWillBorger with an O, not a U. You can also find me on Blue Sky. I'm finally posting there regularly at Edgar Allan Bro. I've got some work at IGN and Shack News. At IGN, I'm reviewing the Zombies mode for Call of Duty 6, and I just reviewed MechWarrior 5 Clans. And for Shack, I'm writing about half a dozen things. You can find me there. And you can find me also on the Platformers podcast, which we record every week.
Okay.
Thomas, where can we find you?
Well, you can find me on Blue Sky. Just search for Thomas Wilde and you'll find me. And my handle is not that easy to say out loud. But I am currently writing a column every week for Hard Drive about whatever indie game caught my eye that week. Next week is probably going to be Bridge Curse 2 once I crack a little bit further into that. I'm also to be found... you can read my Silent Hill 2 remake guide on IGN, or I can be found doing semi-regular coverage of the Seattle tech scene as a local journalist on GeekWire.
Awesome stuff. Murph, you have a podcast called This Podcast is a Bad Idea, covering niche internet communities and horrors or peculiarities. We have a YouTube channel, and I highly recommend you check it out. It will feature footage from the game. And what is our next game, Murph?
Next game, we are powering up. We are going to show what it means to go beyond, and we are going to be talking about Dragon Ball Z Budokai 2, not Budokai Tenkaichi 2, Budokai 2, because those are separate franchises that came out at the same time.
These are real video games.
You guys don't need a third voice for that, do you? Because I love the Budokai games.
We already have our good friend David co-hosting with us, and this episode has been pushed back several times. So
Rip.
I'm going to have to demand that the three of you only answer and refer to one another as Goku the entire time.
Yes.
I'm not kidding.
One of you needs to be like Super Saiyan Goku, Goku Black, and then pick your third Goku.
We'll see how it goes.
Goku GT, Goku Ultra Instinct, Goku with fries.
Don't forget
we're wrapping up
Shamrock
on Goku
Goku.
with fries.